First about the alliance. Renault and Nissan, two completely different company. One very French, based in Paris, extremely regional, very strong in Europe and expanding. From the other side, Nissan, which is also a very Japanese company based in Tokyo, a global company, strong presence in the United States, strong presence in Asia, and expanding in many other countries. I'm the CEO of both of these companies. Just to give you an idea, we'll be selling this year 6.3 million cars worldwide. Revenue will be about $160 billion. The profit that we are forecasting for the year between the two companies is about $7 billion. We represent 9% market share globally. That's about the size of this alliance. This alliance is something very unique because that's the first time you have two companies working together, having cross-shareholding, and spending more time about cooperating together than fighting each other. And creating, at the end of the day, a lot of value that you can measure through market capitalization, increase of profit, growth, and particularly efficiency of investment. Because when you cooperate between two companies, you can understand that you do not have to duplicate a lot of technological development. You can have one company developing a technology and sharing it with the other one, while the other one selecting other kind of technology and sharing the result with it. So it's a very efficient system. Nobody doubt about the efficiency of alliance, but the problem is it's very difficult and delicate to manage. And I'm sure you know about that when you have people of different cultural background, it's a little bit more complex to manage into making them one team going into one direction than if you have people with the same cultural background. So we are operating in an industry, which is the car industry, which is still one of the most important industry in the world because it generates huge employment. Give you an idea, we have 200,000 employees in Nissan. We have 150,000 employees in Renault. And you have at least 6 times this amount working for us. That means the people in the supplier world working specifically for Nissan or working specifically for Renault represents about 6 times how many people working inside the company. So if we say both companies have 350,000 employment, you're going to say, well, there is about 2 million people working for the two companies, for the suppliers, with the company servicing the company. So it's a huge employment industry. The second one is we are very heavy in terms of investments, not only technological investment, but also capacity investment, manufacturing investment. Just again, to give you an idea, when you take the investment amount made by each company, we're talking about $10 billion a year in terms of annual investment to develop cars, to develop technology, or to develop facility. We are in an industry, which is the car industry, which is extremely competitive. Some people think that it's a commodity business, but we are very far from a commodity business because you have a lot of people disappearing, companies disappearing. You have a lot of companies growing. Particularly today, we have a lot of Chinese car manufacturers wanting to become global players, Indian car manufacturers wanting to become global players, and then you have car manufacturers declining or disappearing, particularly into the developed countries. We are an industry where technology is very important, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples where you're going to understand that this is not a commodity business. The first one is fuel efficiency and environmentally friendly products. We know today that the cars that are rolling on the roads are cars which are obsolete 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. They are obsolete. Why? Because they consume too much energy, and second, they emit too much CO2 or any kind of emission. And what they're doing today is unacceptable 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. And the only way you're going to solve it is by putting much more technology that we are developing, and we want to make it more affordable. So this is not a commodity business. This is a technology-driven business. That's from one side. From the second side is when you take a look at the car industry, today 65 million cars are sold in the world every year. 65 million. From the 65 million, you have a stable portion, which is the number of cars sold in the developed economy. United States, Western Europe, Japan. In these particular 3 areas of the world, the car sales are declining. They have been declining in the US for the last 2 years. They have been declining in Japan for the last 4 years. They have been stable or declining in Europe for the last 3 years. And I think this is a trend which is going to continue. So this is about 40 million cars a year. Then you have the growing part of the car industry. That's Russia, China, India, Brazil, Argentina, the Middle East, parts of Africa. Here we are in 2007 with about 20% plus rates of growth, which means that this represents 24 million cars today and probably will represent at least 40 million cars in 5 or 6 years down the road. That's where the growth is taking place. And this growth is very interesting because it's growing in all directions: luxury car, sports car, minivan, crossover, but also entry-level cars. And that's why we're coming with concepts where we're saying, well, we need very cheap car. We need very low-cost car to give access to mobility for a lot of people for which today the car is a dream. It's something that they cannot buy. You take into consideration the U.S. market, you cannot buy a new car in the U.S. at less than $9,000. That's the cheapest one. Well, $9,000, it's a lot of money. And you go to countries like India or like Africa, well, it's impossible for anybody to imagine buying a car for more than $3,000 or $4,000. And technologically, it's possible. And we're working on it to give access to mobility to people at a much lower level of pricing. And this is also a technical challenge on which we are working on, and extremely important for booming countries like the one I mentioned. I can mention safety, comfort, communication. I came out with a meeting, one of your labs, where we see obviously that the car today is inefficient. There are a lot of things that we should be able to do from a car that we're not doing. When you take a look to the evolution of the telephone for the last years and how much you can do around the telephone, and when you take a look about how much you can do from a car, you understand that there is a huge opportunity around the car in terms of connecting, when you are in a car, connecting you with the rest of the world or allowing you to access a lot of information which is not being used today. And this reflects in a certain way to the fact that the market capitalization of the car manufacturer is very low compared to the market capitalization of companies like Apple or like Google or like other companies like this. So there is a revolution that yet to be done in terms of how to use better the car and making the car better connected with the rest of the world. Now, these are some points I wanted to mention, that it's not a commodity business. A lot of things are going to happen. That's an industry which is going to continue to be very important. I want to quote also somebody I met this morning who said, if you want to change the world, you change the car. Because everybody has a car, and everybody wants to have a car. If you want to, and the fact that, for example, we're talking about electric car in city, well, this is going to change a lot of the cities. The fact that you're talking about clean diesel in the future for SUVs, that's going to change also the equation in terms of emission and in terms of technology. So the car is an important element into changing society. But in order to make changes, come back to the last element I want to mention, always leadership is very important. Technology does not move anything unless technology is based on leadership somehow, somewhere. And leadership is about how you make a lot of people going into a direction which is not obvious, how you make a lot of people going through efforts and hardships, being motivated that they wouldn't do without this leadership. How do you put the light at the moment where people are a little bit disoriented about where to go? And this is where leadership is important. I was very struck by the fact that leadership has no importance in situations where everything's going well. I give a very simple example. If you are flying an airplane, you don't care about who is the captain in the airplane, as long as the plane is going well. It's taking off, there is no turbulence, there is no thunderstorm, you're landing, you don't care about who is the captain, you don't care about what's going on in the airplane. Now, imagine yourself in the airplane and all of a sudden there is smoke in the airplane, or the airplane starts to get into a turbulence. Well, you want to hear about the captain. You want to hear about who's going to make the decision, because you are in a situation of uncertainty, you are in a situation of anxiety, and that's where leadership is very important. Well, this is probably one of the most precious resource in an organization is how do you prepare your people to become leaders in the future, and how do you prepare your people to face uncertainties, crisis, disruption that you don't know where that would be coming from, but you know that ultimately it's going to be happen. So I don't want to make a lecture on this, but I want to open up some chapters so we can have a better discussion, whatever you want to talk about the industry, whatever you want to talk about technology, whatever you want to talk about leadership, whatever you want to talk about, cross-cultural management. How do you make people of different culture, different background working together? How do you overcome the natural suspicion, the natural friction coming from Chinese working with French and working with Japanese, or engineers working with marketers, or people with a financial background, each one of them having a different point of view on a specific issue, having probably contradictory opinion on where you need to go. How you make this happen in a way that is not disruptive but productive, and how you overcome this obstacle, not only on a 3-month base, 6 months base, but on a longer period of time. And this is a very important element. Probably this was not important 10 years ago because companies used to be very national company, mainly working in their own market. Today, companies have to be global. They have to associate people coming from every corner of the world. And we can mention, for example, how today in a car company, you have engineers simultaneously working on the same project based in Tokyo, based in Mumbai, based in Beijing, or based in Mexico City, or based in South Carolina. How you make them work, even though they have one only common things, which is the language. They all speak English, but they have completely different backgrounds. They have completely different trainings. They have been to completely different engineering schools. They have different facilities or obstacles. How do you make it happen? And this is a critical issue because the more we're going to progress into the 21st century, the more we as major corporations are going to have to make this, recognizing the difficulty but making it work smoothly. This is my introduction. I promised I'm not going to take more time for this. Now, I know you have a lot of questions. I'm going to turn it back to you. So who would like to start with the first question?
How important was organizational culture to you in turning around the company? Like when you came in, did you see fundamental problems in the way the culture was set up at the company? And what specific steps did you take to fix that in terms of motivation or hierarchy or the way things were structured? Yeah. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, it's cultural impediment are huge. And the first thing you need to do, if you move into an organization and you know that this organization is having a pitiful performance, the first thing is you need to go after is what are the obstacles in terms of culture to this performance. And I can take the case of Nissan in 1999, just to give you the picture of Nissan 1999. This is a company which in 1999 had about $20 billion of debt at the moment where all the other car manufacturers were doing very well. That means they were cash, they had no debt. 1% operating margin on average for 10 years, while the main competitors were between 6 and 8% operating margin. 1% return on invested capital for 10 years, while most of the others were above 10%. And, a lot of people, very competent, very talented, but they did not understand why, Toyota and Honda were doing so well, and Nissan was doing so poorly, even though you have the same people. You're in Japan, you're hiring the same engineer, you're having the same, marketers, you're having the same salespeople. And why do you have such a different thing? And the issue was mainly in the culture of the company, not culture of the country. It has nothing to do with the country. And then you're going to have to go and detect what are these drivers of inefficiencies. And when you detect this driver of inefficiencies, and you cannot have a laundry list of 120 drivers because people are going to be lost. You're going to have to say, what are the 3 or 4 elements I'm going to be fighting against in order to help turn the company around? And in the case of Nissan, it was very clear. The first one is, the company was not profit-driven. Not at all. Not at all profit. Profit was considered as a necessary evil. You know what? I mean, you have to be profitable, so you have to make efforts to make profitable. And so if you make a little bit profit, you're fine. Well, if you do not turn it around by saying, well, profit is very important. It's not about money. Profit is the only signal in a company that doing things right. I'm talking about not somebody having a monopoly. I'm talking about in a competitive area. Profit is the only signal that your customers are happy, you have the right product, you're advancing fast enough. It's profit, nothing else. That your quality is good, that your customer satisfaction is high, that your product is very profitable. You need to continue to do the same thing or change. If you ignore profit, if you say, oh, no matter what, I'm going to continue to do whatever I've done, profit is a necessary evil, well, there are a lot of things that you will never change in terms of product, in terms of technology. That's number one. Number two, we had an organization which was extremely, in silos. Engineers used to work with engineers. Marketers used to work with marketers. Salespeople used to work with salespeople. Japan was isolated from the United States. The European has a different organization. So the fact that there was no cross-functional work, not cross-boundary work, was a killer in terms of performance. That's number two. The third element is, we used to do cars that we liked, not cars that customer liked. That's very important. No, that's very important. And this is something which is, for car manufacturer, obviously people working for car manufacturer love cars. That's why they are here. They love the product. They want to contribute to it. Well, this is good and bad. Because if you love the product, well, at a certain point, you imagine yourself driving this product, and you end up doing cars for you. Well, that's good. That's good. But it's very difficult that, if you're an engineer working in the United States, trying to imagine a car for you, probably not adequate to the car that you need to build for an Indian consumer that's going to drive the car in Mumbai. Okay? It's very different. And we need to disconnect ourselves from what we like, what we think is good, from who is your customer target, and what kind of product you want to do for him. So this disconnection did not happen. We used to do a lot of cars that we liked, that we thought was good for the consumer. And in fact, we had to create a culture where we say, no, even though I don't like this car, I think that's the car that we need to do for the consumer. In fact, when we come to design decision, I always make the final decision on the design. Why I do it? It's not because I think I'm smarter than other people in the company. Not at all. It's to stop the discussion on design, because when the CEO says, that's the car we're going to do, there is no more discussion. As long as the CEO did not do that, you're going to continue to discuss, you know what, I don't agree with the executive vice president to make this decision. I think, this design is not good, and we're going to continue to change the car. When the CEO comes and say, that's it, we stop the discussion, we're going to all be zooming into doing this car. And in a lot of cases, I do not decide on the car that I like the most. In fact, in many cases, I decide on a car that I don't like, but I think that that's what fits with the consumer. And that's a very important element into making sure that you're doing car for your consumer. So, customer-driven, profit-driven, cross-functional work. I mean, these are three of the obvious weaknesses which were in the culture. And then in Nissan there was something which was very important. Is, by the way, which I find in Renault, and I'm sure all the other car manufacturers have it. Is, French people have a tendency to trust only French people. And Japanese people have a tendency to trust only Japanese people. So when you say, okay, I'm going to do a car, we say, you don't do a quality car, we say it has to come from Japan. Okay? It has to be done by Japanese engineers. Well, it's true that Japanese engineers can do great cars. But if they can transmit the processes and they can transmit the knowledge to American engineers and French engineers, they're going to do as well. Because at the end of the day, it's the culture of the company which is going to be prevailing. Well, this is something which was not obvious, but this is something, in the culture of the company, that this is something that we needed to nurture, put some rationality behind it. Because how can you make people work across the world if somehow you give them the impression that they are second-rate citizen or second-rate contributor compared to the one who are part of the mother company? What I'm telling you about Renault or Nissan, I'm sure it's valid for any one of the big three. I'm sure it's valid for any other European car manufacturer. This tendency to privilege your own culture by saying, well, we are only capable of do productivity and quality is a poison for the organization, particularly the one which want to be efficient globally. You asked me a question that I can continue for 30 minutes. I'm going to stop there. Okay.
So thank you for coming. And I actually was fortunate enough to be here 2 years ago when you came and spoke. And somebody asked you a question about hybrid vehicles and alternative energy fuels.
And your response was somewhat, that this was not going to be an important part of the business for at least another 10 years, and that it was, a very small portion. And based on your opening remarks, it seems that has changed somewhat.
Yeah.
And so if maybe you could elaborate on
Good.
the leadership of having to make, transitions.
That's an interesting question. Well, there is always a confusion about technological development and business development. Well, in technology, no car company can squeeze any technology. That means we need to continue to work on clean diesels, hybrid, electric car, fuel cells, continue to work into the efficiency of normal gasoline engine, flex fuel, everything. Nobody can squeeze it. And that's why alliances are very important, because as you cannot squeeze any technology, and as the development cost of this technology is very high, the more car manufacturers join forces, the more you can afford the financial investment which is required. Now, when you move from technology development to mass marketization, it's a different story. Because when you take a look very lucidly on the 65 million cars sold in the world today, how many of them are hybrids? Statistically, 2007. The hybrid technology exists for 10 years already. Okay? How many of them are hybrids? How many of them are electrics? How many of them are clean diesels? Okay. Take the true main technology we are working on. Today it's less than, 1 per 1,000. Okay? So it doesn't mean that it's not important. It is important for the future, because we know that somehow, I think anyway that electric car is going to be big in urban environment. Clean diesel are going to come very big, particularly in utilization of SUVs and etc. Hybrid are going to be a factor in mixed utilization. Flex fuel are going to be very important in countries where you can produce ethanol in a very efficient way, like Brazil, for example. Maybe not in other countries, but in Brazil, flex fuel is going to be, it's already a big factor. So you have to prepare yourself, but you need to make the difference between technological development from one side, mass marketization from the other side. Because consumers are very interested into technological development, but they want it in an affordable way. They just don't want to pay a ludicrous price for technological development. They want it in an affordable way. So you have to play with time and make sure you're making enough efforts in order to be ready for mass marketization. So I can tell you that technology is very hot today. We're putting a lot of money in it. The time of this becoming mass marketed is going to still take some years.
My name is Gordon from second year. My name is Gordon. I want to ask in general, how do you look at the marriage and divorce in the auto industry? And specifically, what did you plan to do if GM had said yes when you popped the question?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. You're talking about marriage. I mean, I think alliances between companies is like marriage between two people, exactly the same. I mean, you all know very well that I know a lot of management, business school students here. The best management lessons are coming from real life experience. Always. If you don't know what to do, take a look at life around you. Your relationship with people around you, and you always have the best lesson. What marriage? I mean, let me make a parallel between marriage from one side and alliances from the other side. Can you buy your wife? I don't think so. Can a woman buy a husband? I think the relationship is going to be a little bit shaky. If you say, you know what, you have to live with me because I bought you. Well, acquisition is the same. Acquisition is the same. Let's suppose Renault in 1999 bought Nissan. Okay? What kind of partnership you are establishing with somebody by saying, I own you? What kind of a relationship you're establishing? Let me take you something else. That means we know very well that the strength of a marriage is not judged after 6 months. It's judged after 10 years or 20 years. And the strength of a marriage is based on the fact that each member of the marriage considers that he is being enriched by this marriage. That, after 5 years, he's a better person. Okay? But same thing for companies. When I establish an alliance, after 5 years, I want to know what's in it for me. What's in it for me as Nissan? What's in it for me for Renault? take the same basic principle that exists in a marriage, implement them in management, you get a very strong relationship. Very strong relationship. You can extrapolate from one area to the other. And what we try to do in the case of the lines is, let's not try to imagine something very sophisticated. Let's follow basic human needs of mutual respect, autonomy, win-win situation. Let's try to see concretely what are the benefits of this alliance. And if we continue to do this constantly, well, we're going to go for the long term. And nothing is going to be guaranteed by just a financial transaction. I buy you, so you owe me, or I'm going to... Because fundamentally in management, you know that. The most important element of the strengths of a corporation are things you cannot command. What's the strength of a company? What's the strength of an institution? It's motivation. That's it. Nothing else. A company which is strong, it's a company where you have strong motivation inside the company. All employees believe in the strategy, believe in the leadership, believe that they're going to change the world, that they're going to contribute to the world in a positive manner. Okay? But you cannot command motivation. You cannot say, be motivated. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. People give you motivation if they want. If they feel motivated, they're going to be fired up, they're going to go the extra mile, they're going to do a lot of things, and you cannot order them to do it. So when you take a look about the fact that the strength of a corporation is mainly based on an individual willingness to contribute, go the extra mile, then you know why you need to do alliances in certain ways and not other ways, why autonomy is important, why respect for identity is important. And even though it can appear naive from time to time compared to a massive acquisition, etc., at the end of the day, that's the only thing which is lasting. And I think in the industry, everybody knows that alliances are a very good solution to allow different parties to overcome some of the obstacles. The only problem is everybody knows also they are very difficult to execute, and it's very difficult for them to be successful. And that's why we are finding ourselves in an awkward situation where we think that in the alliance between Renault and Nissan is something very strong, but there is no other reference. I mean, we cannot, when we want to do a benchmark, we cannot go anywhere because practically all the alliance and acquisition which have been made has collapsed or did not deliver the results. They were great at the beginning, but that after 2 or 3 or 4 years, the cracks started, and then the disadvantages of the alliance started to show compared to the advantages. So I think it's a very good concept. I think it's difficult today to execute. We're going to still continue to have to change our mindset to make them more acceptable and more performant. But I think ultimately it will happen.
You talked about some of the challenges of producing a $3,000 car versus a $9,000 car. And I assume that means you got to cut back somewhere on safety or environmental features. Where do you decide what's acceptable to cut back and what's not?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, when we talk about the $3,000 car, we're talking about India. Today, that's an interesting issue. In India, a lot of people would like to buy a car, but they just cannot buy a car which is at $5,000 or $6,000. So if you want to give access to a lot of people to cars, when I say to access to cars, that means move them from a motorcycle to a car or from a tricycle to a car, well, you're going to have to lower the cost of the car. And $3,000 car, in fact, it's a development that we are today doing. Renault and Nissan are doing. I mean, I don't think we can do a $3,000 car from a engineering center in Japan or engineering center in France or engineering center in the United States. It's impossible. But we're going to do it with an engineering center in India. And in fact, we have a partner, which is Bajaj, the Bajaj company in India, which is partnering with us. We told them, you do the car, you make the engineering. We're going to put all the technology of Renault and Nissan for you. You come and you say, I want an engine with this kind of specification. I want a Nissan engine. I want a Renault transmission. I want this kind of material. I want this kind of engineer. Everything is available. You do the car because you'll do it better than us. And that's what they're doing. And in fact, the car should be on the market in 2010. We have already a time frame for this. But this is a car for India, which means following Indian specification, following Indian consumer request. Now, the second question is, can you make a car for India that you can sell in the United States? Obviously not, because the regulation between the two countries are not the same, because consumers are not the same and they don't have the same expectation. Can you transform a $3,000 car based for India into a very low-cost car for the United States? Yes, I think that's possible. But this is another engineering which will come after you have built the $3,000 car for India, where you're going to have to go through crash tests, where you're going to have to go through, environmental regulation, etc., and see what you should reinforce into the car into making it acceptable. But even if you come with a $5,000 car or $6,000 car, it's already a breakthrough for a market where the lowest price car is $9,000. So that's what we are talking about. It's not about bringing a car which does not respect US regulation or European regulation. You can't do that. It's how from a platform or very low-cost car you can bring a very competitive car for developed markets.
Hi, I'm one of the engineering students in the audience. And the first half of my question was actually that question. The other half was that it seems that in a lot of developing countries, some of the most successful cars are those that actually have no innovation and haven't for many years. A good example is like the Nissan 1400 backy pickup truck in South Africa that is so popular for so long because it hasn't changed in decades. And I'm wondering if this is an additional challenge making a successful company for developing, or a successful car for a developing country.
Yeah. Well, in the car industry, you cannot predict success. You don't know. You have cars which are successful because they have been here for a long time. We have a lot of cars like this. We have car, for example, in Mexico, which is being used particularly for taxi driver, which has been here for 20 years. Our engineers many times said, well, we need to change the car, but marketers said, don't touch it. It's become an icon in Mexico. You have to continue to run it, just modify it a little bit, and it's a Tsuru, and it's doing very well. For those of you who are going to drive, go back to Mexico, you're going to see Nissan Tsuru. It's still there. It's very strong, very profitable, very old car, modernized, adapted to regulation. From the other spectrum, you have a lot of cars which are completely new, like electric cars. We have shown a concept of electric car at the Tokyo Motor Show last month. The interest was huge about electric car, and particularly the one we shown because it was X-by-wire. You have a robot giving you all the explanation about how to maneuver into the car. There were a lot of innovation. People are very interested in innovation because they connect to this innovation. This is something that they think they need. Then you have a third type of cars. This is interesting, is we also in Tokyo, we showed a supercar. And when we come with a supercar, a lot of people say, you're crazy. You're coming with a supercar at the moment where the only talk is CO2 reduction and no emission cars. You're coming with a 480 horsepower, 3.5 second acceleration from 0 to 60 miles per hour kind of car. 310 kilometers per hour max speed, and you put it on the Tokyo Motor Show. Guess what? When we came to the Tokyo Motor Show and we introduced all the innovation, everybody was on the GTR. Everybody. I mean, there was some interest into the electric car, but everybody was on the supercar. We showed the supercar in LA in the motor show this week. We had the renewal of the Murano. Murano is a very successful car, very accepted. We had the Murano and the GTR on the stage. Oof, all the attention was on the GTR. So I don't think you can say only electric car or environmentally friendly car or only old kind of design people are used to or only supercars. We are in industry where we're going into more segmentations, and you're going to have to come with the adequate product segment by segment, market by market. That's our job. And that's why I think it's not anymore a commodity business. Cars which are going to be successful across the globe, across segments, do not exist. You need to be much more tailoring to the needs of segments and regional geographical zone. Yeah.
How do you feel about the emergence of new entrants into this industry, like Tesla Motors, for example?
Yeah. Well, I think there will be new players, and it's normal. Let's take two cases, China and India. China is already the third largest market in the world for automobile. Soon is going to become the second largest in the world. So it's normal that when you have a market as big as China, Chinese car manufacturers want to play a bigger role in the industry. Has always been the case. Now, you need also to have another statistic. I mean, people and the press usually talk about Chinese market invading all the market in the world. Well, we're far from this reality today, because even when you take a look at the Chinese market by itself, independently of export, the Chinese makers, I'm not talking about joint ventures. You have Dongfeng Nissan and Dongfeng Honda and FAW working with Volkswagen or General Motors, etc. I'm not talking about these ones. I'm talking about the real, unique Chinese car manufacturers. They represent today 12% of their market. That's the lowest percentage in any country. If you take the United States, the big three represent 40% market share, 50% market share. If you take Germany, the Germans represent 60% market share. If you take France, the French represent 50% market share in their market. Take the Japanese, represent 80% of the Japanese market. If you take Russia, the Russian car manufacturers represent 50% of their market. The market where the local manufacturer represent the smallest market share is in China, and they represent 12%. So I think the first step for them is to gain back on their own market, and I think it's possible. They're going to grow on their own market, and then eventually grow outside. But it's going to take some time. So I don't think that the resurgence is an immediate threat to any established car manufacturer. Have to be watched very carefully, and ultimately one of them will prevail and will become a large car manufacturer in China and eventually globally. The Indians is a different story, because the Indian car manufacturer have something which is special, is they don't try to do Western kind of cars or Japanese kind of cars, cheaper, better. They try to come with a completely different kind of car. When you take a look to what Tata is doing, what Hinduja is doing, what Bajaj is doing, what Mahindra is doing, which are all the car manufacturers, they are trying to come with a different car. Smaller, cheaper, much more frugal, etc. So they're trying to innovate. And they are trying to innovate in the only segment where the global car manufacturers are not very heavy. It's the entry-level cars, the low-priced cars. And they're doing good innovation. So back to it. Now, if we ignore it, well, we're going to end up having a major Indian car manufacturer dominating the Indian market and probably, being a big player worldwide. Because let's not forget that the car industry is always about somebody getting into the low-priced car and moving up. That's what the Japanese done. I remind you, Toyota, Nissan, and Honda started with very small cars. Quality was not very good. Fixed quality, moved up. Koreans, same thing. Cheaper than Japanese, trying to move up. Well, the Indians are going to do the same thing. It's the way up. You start by going into the entry level, and then you moved up. Well, if the global car manufacturer ignore that, we're going to get the same story coming from China or India. Now, we learn from history. So what we're doing today is, whenever there is an initiative in the low-price car, you need to make sure that what an Indian car manufacturer can do, you have to do, in order to compete immediately before it's become a major threat. So ultimately, I think we may end up with big Chinese, big Indian, and it's normal. But I don't think that is going to be as easy as what some of the analysts of the industry are saying. Yeah.
What is your view on the integration between cars and computers / internet in the future?
How do I see it? Well, I think, I totally agree on the fact that the car is a place which is not very efficient today. You must be able to do much more things staying in the car than what you're doing. And a lot of reasons are forbidding this. Safety first. I mean, you have to pay attention when you are in a car. But there are a lot of devices which allows you, like magic bumper, line followers. There are a lot of technology allowing you to be able to be in a car, be very safe, and pay attention to something else. There are a lot of technology. And why attention to something else? Because I think that today, a lot of people are spending a lot of time in the car, and they would like to be more productive when they are in the car. They want to get more information. They want to be able to do certain things when they are in the car. And we as car manufacturers have to facilitate it, because even if we do it, we're going to be, wealthier, because, part of what Apple is doing with the telephone is very interesting. How you generate revenue by just opening up your hardware to much more software application information. And second, because it's a request from consumer. Consumers do not want to, I've been told that average time spent by a U.S. citizen in a car particularly in urban driving, it's 1 hour to go to the office, 1 hour to come back. You have 2 hours where there is nothing you can do except, driving your car, mentally listening to some music, or talking to the telephone. There are a lot of things that you can do during these 2 hours. And this is without talking about the guy in Beijing, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, in Paris, in London, spending a lot of time in the car. And this is a car this is a time that we need to make more productive. Now, if we do it on our own, we're not going to go very far. We need to partner with Google, Apple, Microsoft, companies who have a different vision of this and try to see how this can make sense from a car manufacturer point of view or from a software company point of view. So you can expect a lot of change coming in this field. Yeah.
Mohammed Al-Mujo, thank you for coming. Basically, we heard a lot of official and unofficial news like a year ago about including GM in the alliance. But there was a lot of opposition from both Rick Wagner and a major shareholder there. So what were your plans for them if they would have joined the alliance, and how would have that made the automotive industry different today?
Yeah. Well, again, if we come back to the marriage example, let's suppose you want to marry somebody, and the father is very favorable, but not the bride. Yeah, you have a problem. In this case, we have a major shareholder, very interested, but the management was not. So in this case, you better not pursue, because wisdom tells you that relationship will never be lasting if somehow there is no mutual appetite and mutual consent. So we went through the study of synergy because we wanted to know how much money there was on the table if this was going through. We found a huge amount of synergy, and there was no discussion about it. I mean, obviously, Renault and Nissan found much more synergy than General Motors, but there was no discussion about the fact that it was sizable. But at the end of the day, it comes to, do you really want to work together or not? And if the answer is maybe not, you better stay away, because something like this is very complex, going to require a lot of efforts. We know what is the amount of synergy which was possible. It's a huge amount of money. We know it for the future, but we think that because of the complexity of the task, you need to have a completely consensual approach. If not, this is going to end up into wasting a lot of energy and destroying a lot of value. That's why I think the strategy is very good, but unless you have a mutual appetite for this, you better not do it. Okay.
You said that in a firm, motivation was the most important, but how do you deal with failure in such a multicultural environment where people didn't deal with failure the same way?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question. Well, that's interesting. It's that failure is very important in management. Because, even if you go back to your years of school, you learn from failing. When you learn a language, you use more the eraser than the pen. That's the way you learn. You make a mistake, you're being corrected, next time you don't do it. You have a bad grade, you don't like it, you're going to work harder. That's the way we learn. We learn from mistakes. Now, what's management about? Management is about how can you learn from small mistakes before they become tragedies. That's management about. I mean, management is about not allowing an organization to deviate from the course too much before you have to make a correction. Because if you can create an environment where people are looking for mistakes, are looking for dysfunctions, and trying to learn from the dysfunction as fast as possible in order to avoid these dysfunctions to become big, I would say, deviation from the course, that's a very powerful culture. So mistakes should not be avoided. The best culture in the industry are culture where you say, welcome to dysfunction. Let's go look at the dysfunction without trying to hide them. Hiding the dysfunction is the worst thing you can do in a company. Hiding problem is the worst thing you can do for your organization. By the way, it's not only about companies, it's about countries also, or about any organization. On the contrary, when you put the problem in front of you and you motivate people into, we have a problem, we need to solve it, you're giving yourself the opportunity to solve it while it's small and solvable, and avoiding this problem to grow into something much bigger. That's the law of physics. That's the law of medicine. You know very well that if you catch a disease at the beginning, it's a relatively small thing to cure it. If you catch it, you sit down on it, you're hiding it, you are acting like it doesn't exist, you're going to have a much more difficult time into overcoming it. Management is the same thing. So you need to have a culture where you do not ignore dysfunction, you do not hide dysfunction, you just say, I recognize dysfunction as soon as possible, I try to learn from dysfunction, and I correct my course. It's very easy to say, it's very difficult to do. And I agree with you that culturally, the French do not deal with failure the way the Japanese deal with failure. It's very different. And what you need to do is, in different ways, try to correct each culture dealing with failure with its its own, strengths and characteristics. For example, you know very well that in Japan, failing is a shame. So you need to work into your organization by saying, no, it's not a shame. Ultimately, we're all going to fail. It's not a shame. What is a shame is repetitive failure. That is a shame. If you do not learn from it, that's a shame. Hiding, it's a shame because you're going to repeat, and it's going to get worse. And I think by giving good example, people will understand. From the French side, the culture is completely different. Because from the French side, the culture of French people are always looking at the bottle half empty. Never half full, So when you see somebody brilliant, 99% performance, you have a tendency to say, oh, but this 1% is not good enough. And here the correction is, the contrary is, do not spend your time looking at the failures. Spend some time reinforcing the positive side. Because if you do not reinforce the positive side, people at the end think that the positive side is not important. That they're not going to spend time reinforcing their strength. So each culture has its own tweaking, and you need to deal with each one of them. In some cases, acknowledging the weaknesses, and in other phases, acknowledging the strengths. But you cannot do the same thing in each country.
Last question.
So, last question.
So, are you thinking about selling the low-entry car for India and other developing countries, like in Africa or in Asia, in other countries?
Yeah. If we put the $3,000 car in India, there are some countries which would be a natural market for this car around India and African countries. All those countries where specification for the car are equivalent to India will be a natural market for the car. The big question for us would be, if you want to bring this car to markets with higher specification, is it worth it? Can you transform from this base the car into something low price, certainly higher price than $3,000, but still acceptable by the consumer? Thank you.